The Garden of Solitude. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows of Forgotten Tales, casting golden rectangles across the wooden floor of Rosalind Bennett's bookstore. At 32, Rosalind had mastered the art of invisibility, not the magical kind found in the fantasy novels that lined her shelves, but the everyday kind that kept people at a comfortable distance. "Thomas, have you finished your homework?" she called to the back room where her 14-year-old brother was supposedly studying. Since their parents' accident 3 years ago, she'd become both sister and guardian, a role she approached with the same meticulous care she gave to cataloging first editions. "Almost done, Roz," came the muffled response, followed by the unmistakable sound of video game effects that Thomas thought he'd successfully hidden beneath his headphones. Rosalind smiled despite herself. That boy could find joy in the smallest things, something she'd forgotten how to do. She returned to organizing the new shipment of books, losing herself in the comforting smell of paper and binding glue. The bell above the door chimed, interrupting her solitude. She looked up to see Mrs. Winters, one of her regulars, bundled in her usual purple coat despite the mild spring weather. "Good morning, dear. Got any new mysteries for an old lady?" Mrs. Winters asked, her eyes twinkling behind thick glasses. "Just unpacked a Ruth Ware you haven't read yet?" Rosalind replied, reaching beneath the counter for the book she'd set aside. These small, predictable interactions were safe. Customers came for books, not personal connections, and that suited Rosalind perfectly. After Mrs. Winters left, clutching her new treasure, Rosalind returned to her inventory spreadsheet. The bookstore barely broke even most months, but it was hers. A sanctuary where she controlled every variable. No surprises, no disappointments, no betrayals like the one that had left her heart in splinters 5 years ago. When Daniel had walked out, taking not only her trust but nearly every penny of their shared savings to chase his true calling with another woman, Rosalind had made a promise to herself. Never again would she hand over the keys to her happiness. "Roz, can I go to Ethan's house on Saturday?" His dad got the new console. Thomas appeared beside her, breaking into her thoughts. She hesitated. Thomas needed normalcy, friends, experiences, everything she'd denied herself. "Sure, but homework first, and I need to drop you off." His face lit up. "You're the best. And hey, maybe you could actually come inside this time instead of doing the drive-by thing? Ethan's mom always asks about you." "We'll see," she said non-committally. The invitation, though innocent, sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. Social circles meant questions, expectations, opportunities for people to get too close. Later that evening, after closing the shop and making dinner, Rosalind stood watering her collection of plants that lined the apartment windows. These silent companions asked for nothing but water and light, giving beauty in return without complication. Thomas watched her from the couch. "You know they're just plants, right? They don't actually talk back." "That's precisely why I like them," she quipped. "Roz," his voice turned serious, unusual for her typically carefree brother. "Are you ever going to date again? I mean, it's been years since that jerk Daniel." She nearly dropped the watering can. "I'm perfectly happy with our life. I have the store. I have you. I have my plants. Not everyone needs romance to be fulfilled. But you don't have friends. You don't go anywhere. You're like those plants, stuck in pots instead of growing outside." His words stung with unexpected truth. "Some plants thrive better in controlled environments," she countered softly. "Yeah, but even those plants need someone to care for them," Thomas said with the accidental wisdom of adolescence before returning his attention to his phone. That night, as moonlight painted silver patterns across her bedroom ceiling, Rosalind considered her brother's words. Had her careful life of self-protection become a prison? The thought unsettled her, but not enough to change the locks she'd placed on her heart. Safety meant survival, and she'd learned that lesson too painfully to forget. Little did she know that tomorrow would bring an unexpected visitor to Forgotten Tales, one who would challenge every wall she'd so carefully constructed. Unexpected encounters. The Tuesday morning crowd at Forgotten Tales consisted of exactly 3 people. A college student who had fallen asleep behind a physics textbook, an elderly man who came every week to read newspapers in the corner armchair. And now, a stranger in a tailored charcoal suit who looked distinctly out of place among the worn shelves. Rosalind watched him from behind the counter, pretending to organize receipts. He moved with purpose, scanning the business section with an intensity that suggested he was looking for something specific. His presence disrupted the quiet rhythm of her store, like a foreign melody in a familiar song. When he approached the counter, Rosalind straightened, adopting her professional smile, polite but distant. "Do you have any books on sustainable business? Models?" he asked, his voice carrying an unexpected warmth that contrasted with his formal appearance. "Third aisle, second shelf from the top," she replied automatically. "Though our selection is limited. There's a business bookstore downtown that would have more options." He tilted his head slightly. "I've been to that one. Too sterile. Books need character, don't you think? Like this place." His eyes scanned the mismatched shelves and reading nooks she'd created from salvaged furniture. "It feels lived in." Something in his genuine appreciation made her pause. "Thank you. I'm Rosalind Bennett, the owner." "Julian Mercer," he extended, his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. "Nice to meet someone who understands that not everything valuable needs to be shiny and new." For a moment, Rosalind forgot to maintain her usual wall of professional detachment. "Most people prefer the chain stores with their coffee bars and bestseller displays. Most people are missing out," he said simply, after Julian left with a stack of books, none of which were the business titles he'd initially inquired about. Rosalind found herself inexplicably unsettled. There had been something in his eyes, a kind of quiet understanding that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. 3 days later, Julian returned, this time dressed more casually in jeans and a navy sweater that somehow still looked expensive. "The O'Hara novel was brilliant," he said by way of greeting. "Any other recommendations?" Before Rosalind could answer, Thomas bounded in from the back room. "Hey, Roz, can I—" He stopped short upon seeing Julian. "Oh, sorry. Thomas, this is Mr. Mercer, a customer." "Mr. Mercer, my brother Thomas." Julian smiled. "Just Julian, please. And you must be the brother who's into space exploration? Your sister mentioned you when she recommended a science fiction series to me." Thomas looked at Rosalind with surprise. She rarely discussed him with strangers. "Yeah, I want to work for NASA someday," Thomas replied, suddenly animated. "Are you into space stuff too?" "Actually, my company is working on sustainable materials that might be used in future habitat construction," Julian said. "Nothing classified, but pretty interesting." Thomas's eyes widened. "You build stuff for space?" "Among other things," Julian laughed. "Mercer Innovations focuses on sustainable technologies across several industries." Rosalind's stomach tightened. Mercer Innovations was frequently in the business news, a rapidly growing company valued at millions. This casual customer browsing her secondhand books was actually Julian Mercer, the entrepreneur whose face had graced the cover of last month's business magazine. "Thomas, homework," she reminded him gently, suddenly eager to re-establish boundaries. After Thomas reluctantly retreated, Julian turned to her with an apologetic smile. "I probably should have mentioned what I do earlier." "It doesn't matter," Rosalind said, though it did. Wealthy businessmen didn't frequent small bookstores without reason. "What can I help you find today?" "Actually, I was wondering if you'd join me for coffee? There's a cafe down the street that makes incredible pastries." The invitation hung in the air between them. Rosalind felt her defenses rise automatically. "I don't leave the store during business hours." "After closing, then?" he persisted gently. "Mr. Mercer, Julian." "Julian," she conceded. "I'm not sure what you're looking for, but I should be clear that I'm not interested in complications." His expression shifted to something unreadable. "I'm looking for good conversation with someone who recommends excellent books. That's all." Something about his straightforward response disarmed her slightly. Still, experience had taught her caution. "I appreciate the offer, but I have to decline." Instead of pushing further, Julian nodded. "I understand. In that case, I'll just have to continue being your customer." He browsed for another half hour before purchasing 3 more books. As weeks passed, Julian became a regular visitor, sometimes stopping in just to browse, other times engaging Thomas in conversations about space technology, or challenging Rosalind to recommend books outside her comfort zone. Despite her initial suspicion, his visits became a strangely anticipated part of her routine. One rainy afternoon, Julian arrived looking less composed than usual, his hair damp from the downpour. "Everything all right?" Rosalind found herself asking, as he shook water from his jacket. "Just one of those days where everything goes sideways," he sighed. "Board meetings that should have been emails, investors wanting impossible timelines, and now this storm when I was looking forward to walking by the river." For the first time, Rosalind saw weariness in his eyes. Not the calculated fatigue of someone seeking sympathy, but the genuine exhaustion of a person carrying unseen weights. It made him suddenly, surprisingly human. "The historical fiction section is empty today," she offered. "It has the most comfortable chair." Julian's smile returned, small but genuine. "Thank you, Rosalind." She watched as he settled into the worn leather armchair, book in hand, tension gradually easing from his shoulders. For 2 hours, he sat reading while rain drummed against the windows, occasionally exchanging glances with Rosalind when something in his book made him smile. When closing time came, Rosalind found herself reluctant to disturb him. Something had shifted between them, not romance, not yet friendship even, but a quiet understanding that perhaps they both needed more than their carefully structured worlds allowed. As Julian finally rose to leave, he paused at the counter. "Thank you. This place is necessary." The simple truth in his words resonated with something deep inside her. For the first time in years, Rosalind felt the faintest crack appear in the walls she'd built around herself. "Same time Thursday?" she found herself asking. Julian's smile reached his eyes. "I'll bring coffee." As the door closed behind him, Rosalind realized with a start that she was looking forward to it. Small steps forward. The Thursday afternoon rain had given way to crisp autumn sunshine that flooded forgotten tales with golden light. Rosalind caught herself glancing at the door more frequently than usual, a behavior she promptly tried to correct by burying herself in inventory tasks. When the bell finally chimed at precisely 4 o'clock, she pretended to be deeply engrossed in her ledger. Julian entered balancing 2 coffee cups and a small paper bag, his presence somehow both disrupting and enhancing the bookstore's tranquil atmosphere. "1 vanilla latte with an extra shot as promised," he said, setting the cup on the counter. "And cinnamon scones from Hartley's Bakery. The owner insisted they're still warm." Rosalind accepted the coffee with measured gratitude. "Thank you. Though you really didn't need to." "I wanted to," Julian interrupted gently. "Besides, it's purely selfish. Happy booksellers recommend better books." The easy charm in his smile made something flutter in her chest, a sensation she quickly suppressed. Still, the coffee was perfect, exactly how she liked it, though she couldn't remember telling him her preference. "Thomas mentioned it when I ran into him outside his school last week," Julian explained, noticing her questioning look. "I was meeting with the principal about sponsoring their science program." "You met my brother outside of the store?" Rosalind felt a flicker of protective concern. Julian nodded. "Completely coincidental. He was excited about their robotics team, but mentioned they needed funding." He shrugged. "My foundation supports STEM education, so it made sense to help." The casual way he mentioned redirecting thousands of dollars toward a school program because her brother was enthusiastic about it left Rosalind momentarily speechless. It wasn't the money that surprised her, it was the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. "You didn't have to do that," she finally said. "I know." Julian's eyes met hers. "I did it because it matters." Those 5 simple words hung between them, weighted, with something Rosalind wasn't ready to examine. Over the following weeks, Julian's visits became a fixture in the rhythm of forgotten tales. He never pushed for more than Rosalind offered, respecting the careful boundaries she maintained. Yet somehow, without her quite noticing, those boundaries began to shift. It started with small things, Julian helping her unpack a heavy shipment of books one afternoon, Rosalind setting aside new arrivals she thought he might enjoy. Conversations that gradually extended beyond literature into personal territories previously off-limits. One quiet Tuesday, Julian arrived carrying a small potted plant with delicate purple flowers. African violets, he explained, placing it on the counter. They thrive in indirect light like your shop windows, low maintenance but beautiful. He paused. Reminded me of this place. The gift was simple yet thoughtful, not grand enough to trigger her defenses but personal enough to acknowledge something growing between them. Thank you, Rosalind said softly, her fingers brushing the velvet petals. It's perfect for the window display. That evening she placed the violet not in the shop window but on her apartment nightstand. The following Saturday, Thomas's science team had their first competition. Rosalind closed the shop early to attend, sliding into the back row of the school auditorium just as the event began. She was surprised when Julian appeared beside her. "Hope you don't mind," he whispered. "Thomas invited me." Before she could respond, the teams were announced and Thomas walked onto the stage looking nervous but determined. Throughout the competition, Rosalind found herself unconsciously leaning toward Julian during tense moments, their shoulders occasionally touching. When Thomas's team won second place, Julian cheered as loudly as she did. Afterward, watching Thomas proudly display his medal to Julian, who listened with genuine interest to the technical details of their robot's design, Rosalind felt something unexpected. A sense of completeness she hadn't experienced in years, as if pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known was incomplete were falling into place. The realization terrified her. Later that night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Rosalind stood on her small balcony staring at the city lights. The careful life she had constructed was changing, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what those changes might bring. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "Thomas is brilliant. You've done an amazing job with him. Sleep well, Rosalind." Simple, words that somehow acknowledged both her achievement and her struggle as her brother's guardian. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that perhaps Julian saw her, truly saw her, in ways others never had. The following week brought unexpected challenges when a pipe burst in the store's back room, damaging several boxes of valuable first editions. Rosalind worked frantically to salvage what she could, but the estimated repair costs threatened to deplete her meager emergency fund. When Julian arrived and found her surrounded by water-damaged books, her eyes red from exhaustion and stress. He simply rolled up his sleeves and worked alongside her without comment. It wasn't until hours later, when they'd saved what could be saved, that he gently suggested calling a professional restoration service. "I can't afford that," Rosalind admitted reluctantly. "What if it were an advance?" Julian suggested carefully, "for curating a special collection for Mercer Innovation's new headquarters. We need a library that reflects our values and no one understands books like you do." Rosalind recognized the offer for what it was, help disguised as business to preserve her pride. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain the independence that had protected her for so long. But another part, a growing part, recognized that sometimes strength meant accepting a helping hand. "I'll need a formal contract," she said finally, "and complete curatorial control." Julian's smile was warm with understanding. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As they stood amid the chaos of the damaged store, something shifted in Rosalind's perception. The walls she had built weren't just keeping pain out, they were keeping life at bay. That night, for the first time in 5 years, Rosalind allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to trust again. Not completely, not all at once, but in small steps like testing ice on a frozen lake, cautious yet hopeful. When Julian texted to check on her, she responded with an invitation that surprised even herself. "Thomas is at a sleepover tomorrow. Would you like to have dinner at my place? Nothing fancy, just pasta and conversation." His reply came quickly. "I'd be honored. Should I bring dessert?" Staring at those simple words, Rosalind felt both terror and exhilaration. She was opening a door that had been sealed shut for years, with no certainty of what waited on the other side. "Yes," she typed back. That would be lovely. Small steps forward indeed. The storm within. The pasta was simple. Linguine with homemade pesto, a recipe Rosalind had perfected during countless quiet evenings alone. She had changed outfits 3 times before settling on a casual blue dress, then spent 10 minutes berating herself for caring so much about her appearance. It was just dinner, just conversation, nothing more. When Julian arrived carrying a bakery box and a bottle of wine, she noticed he'd also made an effort. Dark jeans and a slate-gray button-down that made his eyes appear deeper, more intense somehow. The realization that he might be as nervous as she was came as an unexpected comfort. Your apartment is exactly how I imagined it, Julian observed, taking in the overflowing bookshelves, the clustering of plants along every windowsill, the mismatched furniture that somehow created a harmonious whole. And how did you imagine it? Rosalind asked, pouring wine into stemless glasses. Like your store. Thoughtfully arranged chaos. Beautiful without trying to be. His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, causing her to look away. Dinner conversation flowed more easily than Rosalind had anticipated. Julian spoke about growing up in a small coastal town, the son of a fisherman and a schoolteacher, his journey through engineering school on scholarships, and the unlikely success of his sustainable materials company. People think I had some grand vision, he admitted, but honestly I just wanted to solve problems that mattered. The success caught me by surprise. And now? Rosalind asked. When you have everything you worked for? Julian considered her question, twirling pasta thoughtfully. Now I'm learning that success and fulfillment aren't always the same thing. Professional achievements don't keep you warm at night. He paused. What about you? Has the bookstore always been your dream? Rosalind hesitated, then decided on honesty. No, I was studying architectural preservation before things changed. She rarely discussed her past, but something about the quiet intimacy of the moment encouraged disclosure. When our parents died, Thomas needed stability. The bookstore was for sale and it seemed like a safe harbor. Do you regret it? Julian's question was gentle, without judgment. Not regret, exactly. I love the store. But sometimes I wonder about the path not taken. She smiled faintly. Funny how life redirects us. After dinner, they moved to the small balcony. The night air carried the first hint of winter, and Rosalind wrapped herself in a knit throw. Julian stood close enough that she could feel his warmth, without actually touching. Tell me about Daniel, he said quietly. Rosalind stiffened, nearly spilling her wine. How do you know about him? Thomas mentioned him once. Just said he hurt you badly. Julian's eyes remained on the city lights below. You don't have to talk about it. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken histories. Finally, Rosalind spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We were engaged, building a life together, or so I thought. Then one day I came home to find half our apartment empty and our savings gone. The memory still carried a sting. He left a note, saying he'd found his true purpose with someone else, someone who apparently shared his newfound spiritual awakening. Her laugh held no humor. They moved to an ashram in New Mexico. I'm sorry, Julian said simply. It wasn't just the betrayal, Rosalind continued, surprising herself with her candor. It was the humiliation. Everyone had warned me, everyone saw what I couldn't or wouldn't see. And that's why Forgotten Tales has become your fortress. His perception was disarming. Is that how you see it? I see someone who built a safe place when the world proved unsafe. There's courage in that. Julian turned to face her fully. But fortresses can become prisons if we're not careful. His words echoed her own private fears so closely that Rosalind felt momentarily exposed, as if he had glimpsed something she had hidden even from herself. What about you? She deflected. No tragic love story in your past? Julian smiled ruefully. Nothing so dramatic. Just the usual hazards of dating when people are more interested in your bank account than your company. He shrugged. It gets lonely at the top, as they say. The vulnerability in his admission created a bridge between them. Two people whose paths to isolation had been different, but whose experience of it was remarkably similar. When Julian left that night, his goodbye was a gentle kiss on her cheek, brief, respectful but charged with unspoken potential. Rosalind found herself touching the spot long after he'd gone, a strange mixture of anticipation and fear coursing through her. 3 days later, disaster struck. A severe storm damaged the bookstore's roof, sending water cascading through the ceiling onto precious inventory. Rosalind worked frantically through the night with Thomas, trying to salvage what they could, but by morning the damage was catastrophic. The insurance would cover only a fraction of the losses, and repairs would require closing the store for weeks. Standing amid the wreckage of her carefully constructed world, Rosalind felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath her feet. Everything stable was suddenly precarious again. When Julian arrived and saw the destruction, his face reflected her own dismay. Without hesitation, he made calls, arranged for emergency services, and helped move undamaged inventory to dry storage. By afternoon, professionals were assessing the building, and Julian had secured a temporary pop-up location in a nearby shopping center. "It's just until repairs are complete," he explained. "The space was sitting empty anyway. I can't accept this," Rosalind protested weakly, overwhelmed by both gratitude and discomfort at being so deeply in his debt. "You're not accepting anything," Julian countered. "You're letting me help a business I care about. This isn't charity, Rosalind." But when he offered to cover the repair costs that insurance wouldn't, presenting it as an investment in the business, Rosalind's fragile sense of equilibrium finally shattered. "Stop trying to fix everything," she exploded, months of carefully contained emotions suddenly breaking free. "I don't need rescuing. I don't need to be your project or your good deed." Julian stepped back, visibly stunned by her outburst. "Is that what you think this is? What else could it be?" The words poured out unfiltered. "Men like you don't just wander into struggling bookstores and befriend ordinary women without reason." "Men like me?" Julian's voice grew quiet, a dangerous sign. "And what kind of man do you think I am exactly? The kind who needs to be the hero, the kind who solves problems because it's easier than facing his own." She was being unfair, and some part of her knew it, but fear had overtaken reason. "I've worked too hard to hand over control of my life again." Julian's expression hardened. "I have never once asked you to hand over control. I've only ever offered partnership." "Partnership requires equality," Rosalind countered. "How can we be equals when you can solve my biggest problems with a phone call?" The hurt in Julian's eyes was unmistakable. "If you believe money is the only thing I have to offer, then you don't know me at all." He left without another word, and Rosalind stood alone among the ruins of her store, the magnitude of what she had just done slowly sinking in. Fear of vulnerability had led her to hurt someone who had shown her nothing but kindness. Exactly what she had sworn never to do to another person. That night, as she lay awake in her apartment, Thomas's words echoed in her mind. "You're like those plants, stuck in pots instead of growing outside." The storm had damaged more than her bookstore. It had exposed the storm within her, the tempest of fear, distrust, and self-protection that had been raging for years. And in its wake, she faced a devastating question. In protecting herself from pain, had she become incapable of recognizing genuine love when it was offered? For the first time since Daniel's betrayal, Rosalind allowed herself to cry, not for the damaged store, but for the damaged heart that had pushed away perhaps the one person who truly saw her worth. Blooming trust morning light filtered through Rosalind's bedroom window, illuminating the African violet on her nightstand, still vibrant despite everything else that had fallen apart. She touched one of its velvety petals, remembering Julian's words. Low maintenance, but beautiful. For a week, Rosalind had thrown herself into salvaging her store, working alongside contractors at the temporary location Julian had arranged before their argument. She had tried calling him twice, but each time disconnected before the call went through. What could she possibly say to undo the damage her fear had caused? Thomas had been uncharacteristically quiet, observing her with thoughtful eyes that seemed too old for his 14 years. "You know," he said one evening as they unpacked boxes at the pop-up shop, "for someone who reads so many books about people making mistakes and fixing them, you're pretty bad at the fixing part." Rosalind paused, a leather-bound volume halfway to the shelf. "It's not that simple." "It never is in books either," Thomas shrugged. "But the good characters always try anyway." His casual wisdom lingered with her as she continued working, the temporary shop gradually taking shape around them. Julian's influence was everywhere, from the emergency contractors who treated her with special care to the perfect location he'd secured within walking distance of their apartment. Even in his absence, he was supporting her. The grand reopening of the temporary Forgotten Tales location was scheduled for Saturday. Rosalind had sent invitations to regular customers, but there was one name she couldn't bring herself to add to the list, though his absence would be the most noticeable. Saturday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine after a week of gray skies. Rosalind stood before the shop window, adjusting the display one final time. The bell chimed as the first customers entered, and soon the small space was filled with familiar faces offering congratulations and browsing the carefully arranged shelves. Mrs. Winters patted her hand. "Lovely recovery, dear. Though I must say I expected to see that handsome young man who's always watching you when you're not looking." Rosalind felt her cheeks warm. Julian had other commitments. The older woman's knowing gaze saw too much. "Pride makes poor company on cold nights, my dear." By midday, the event was an undeniable success, with sales exceeding even Rosalind's most optimistic projections. Yet amid the bustling activity, she kept glancing at the door, hoping and dreading in equal measure. As the afternoon crowd thinned, Thomas approached her with unusual seriousness. "I need to show you something." He led her to the back office and opened his laptop. "Julian didn't abandon your project. Look." On the screen was a detailed restoration plan for the original bookstore. Not just repairs, but thoughtful enhancements that preserved its character while addressing long-standing issues. There were notes in Julian's handwriting in the margins. "Check with Rosalind about extending the reading nook and ensure original moldings are preserved. Important to our." "How did you get this?" Rosalind asked, her throat tight. "He emails me updates every day," Thomas admitted. He didn't want to pressure you, but he also didn't want to leave us hanging. The realization struck her with stunning clarity. Julian had never tried to take control. He had simply offered support while respecting her independence. The walls she'd maintained weren't protecting her. They were preventing her from recognizing genuine care when it was offered. "I need to find him," she said suddenly. Thomas grinned. "Finally. He's at the original store right now, checking on the contractors." He hesitated. "Roz, you know it's okay to let someone in, right? It doesn't make you weak." She hugged her brother tightly, wondering when he had become so wise. "When did you grow up?" "Probably around the time you stopped paying attention," he teased. 20 minutes later, Rosalind stood outside her damaged bookstore, gathering courage before entering. Through the plastic-covered windows, she could see a figure moving inside, examining the new ceiling beams. The door was propped open for the workers, allowing her to slip in quietly. Julian stood with his back to her, discussing something with the project foreman, his rolled-up sleeves revealing forearms dusted with construction debris. He looked tired but focused. When the foreman walked away, Rosalind cleared her throat. Julian turned, surprise flickering across his face before it settled into careful neutrality. "The repairs are ahead of schedule," he said formally. "You should be able to move back in 3 weeks instead of 5. "Thank you," Rosalind said, the words entirely inadequate for everything she needed to express. "Julian, It's fine," he interrupted. "You were right. I overstepped." "No, I wasn't right." She took a step closer. "I was afraid." There's a difference. Something shifted in his expression, a cautious softening. "Afraid of what?" Of needing someone again. Of letting someone matter so much that they could hurt me. Her voice wavered slightly. Of admitting that somewhere between book recommendations and coffee deliveries, you became important to me. Julian remained still, his eyes never leaving hers. And now? Now I'm terrified, she admitted with a small laugh that caught on a sob. But I'm here anyway. He crossed the distance between them slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. I'm not Daniel, he said softly. I know that now. Rosalind looked around at the careful restoration work, evidence of how thoroughly he had understood what mattered to her. You never tried to change my world. You just wanted to be part of it. Julian reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. That's all I've wanted from the first day. Why me? She asked, the question that had haunted her from the beginning. You could have anyone. Because you saw me before you knew who I was, he answered simply. Do you know how rare that is in my world? You recommended books based on who you thought I was, not what you thought I wanted to hear. The truth of his words resonated deeply. They had both been searching for the same thing. Someone who saw beyond the carefully constructed facades to the person underneath. I can't promise I won't be scared again, Rosalind warned. These walls took years to build, they won't come down overnight. I don't need them to. Julian's thumb traced circles on her palm. I just need you to let me in sometimes. The rest we'll figure out together. When he kissed her, it wasn't the passionate embrace of storybook romances, but something gentler and more profound. A promise of patience, of understanding, of meeting each other exactly where they were. Later, they sat on the half-finished floor of what would again be Forgotten Tales, sharing a takeout dinner as Julian showed her the restoration plans. I thought maybe we could add a coffee corner here, he suggested. Nothing commercial, just a good espresso machine and comfortable chairs. What do you think? We? Rosalind questioned, the word hanging between them. Julian smiled. Figure of speech. It's your store. No, she said thoughtfully. I like we. I'm just getting used to it again. Thomas found them there an hour later, laughing over Julian's terrible attempts to pronounce the titles of French novels. He paused in the doorway, watching his sister's unguarded smile with quiet satisfaction before announcing his presence. So, he grinned, dropping down beside them. Does this mean Julian's coming to my science championship next month? Because we built a much better robot this time. Julian looked to Rosalind, leaving the decision entirely in her hands. One more small evidence of his respect for her autonomy. Yes, she said, reaching for Julian's hand without hesitation. We'll both be there. 6 weeks later, Forgotten Tales reopened its doors. The restoration had preserved its character while subtly enhancing its charm. The new coffee corner proved immediately popular, as did the expanded children's section, where Thomas often helped younger visitors find adventures on rainy afternoons. The morning of the grand reopening, Rosalind arrived early to find the store already unlocked. Inside, Julian stood beside a new addition, a large bay window where light streamed onto a garden of potted plants, including several varieties of African violets. What's this? She asked, touching the leaves of the nearest plant. Your garden of possibility, Julian explained. Some plants thrive better in pots, but they still need room to grow. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. Like some people I know. Rosalind leaned back against him, allowing herself to fully accept the support he offered. The journey from fear to trust wasn't complete. Perhaps it never would be. But she had taken the most important step, believing that love didn't require sacrificing herself. As customers began to arrive, filling the restored space with chatter and life, Rosalind watched Julian chatting easily with Mrs. Winters, his hand occasionally seeking hers as they moved through the crowd. The walls around her heart hadn't disappeared, but they had transformed from a fortress into a garden gate, still defining boundaries but designed to open, to welcome, to connect rather than isolate. Trust, she was discovering, wasn't the absence of fear but the courage to move forward despite it, to risk vulnerability in pursuit of something richer than safety could ever provide. That night, as Julian helped her close the shop, He placed a small box on the counter between them. "What's this?" she asked. "A key," he said simply. "To my house. No pressure, no expectations, just an open door whenever you're ready to walk through it." Rosalind picked up the box, feeling its weight in her palm, not just metal, but the weight of possibilities, of futures yet unwritten. "Thank you," she said, closing her fingers around it. She wasn't ready to use it yet, and Julian didn't expect her to be. But for the first time in years, Rosalind Bennett was looking forward to tomorrow not with caution, but with hope, with the quiet certainty that whatever challenges came, she would no longer face them alone. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the city in gentle possibility, much like the newfound trust blooming in a heart that had finally remembered how to open